All right, as we continue on Spencer Christian Church with our study on the book of Mark, just a quick little recap of where we were in the last lesson. Jesus is really establishing his identity, and that's if we go past this the book of Mark and we don't understand what Mark is trying to communicate and what Jesus was trying to teach during his ministry, especially in these early stages that we find ourselves in right now, then we've missed the big point. So far we've seen 3 encounters take place. First of all, with the scribes, and when Jesus forgives sin, and then when he's accused by the Pharisees of immorality by eating with sinners and tax collectors. And then there was a third altercation encounter where he was they accused him of being unspiritual by not fasting like John's disciples did. And so all of this is intertwined with his identity. They were questioning his claims as the Son of Man, this Messiah figure that he was promising to be. So we're going to look at another altercation today with the Pharisees, and they're going to accuse him of disobedience. So let's get into the text. Mark 2:23 through 24 says, "And it happened that he was passing through grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples began to make their way along while picking the heads of grain. The Pharisees were saying to him, 'Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?'" So this time the Pharisees accused Jesus' disciples of disobeying the law by picking up grain on the Sabbath. The law did teach that it was unlawful to work on the Sabbath. However, the Pharisees had created numerous definitions of what work was, with the intention of limiting every possibility of breaking this commandment. So their idea was initially a good thing. They were trying to keep people away from sinning, but it had gotten so extensive that they missed the point of what God was trying to establish with that law in the first place. So the result was that the set of rules that set of rules that they had established was just ridiculous. It was they had created a heavy burden for the ordinary person to be able to fulfill, and somebody who was sincerely trying to follow the law. But in this context, even the picking of some grain, or even a single fruit from a tree as a snack, was considered as work by these fanatical Pharisees. So that kind of gives you an idea of what Jesus is up against here with the Pharisees. So we read on. "And he said to them, 'Have you never read what David did when he was in need, and he and his companions became hungry? How he entered the house of God in the time of the Abiathar the high priest, and he ate the consecrated bread, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest. And he also gave it to those who were with him. Jesus said to them, 'The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man,'" he's using that identifying language again to that Daniel chapter 7 passage of the one who had dominion and a kingdom. All right, so whenever we hear Son of Man, don't separate it from that idea of what Daniel 7 was talking about, dominion and authority. So he's saying the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. So Jesus uses this example here of King David at the time of this sacred bread, when he came in and he took some of the 12 loaves of bread that was baked and set in the place where the priests offered the sacrifice. So these were to be eaten only by the priest. There was a time when David, when he was on the run trying to avoid capture by King Saul, came searching for food and was told by the priest that the only food that was available was the showbread. So he took and he ate these things. So Jesus, in essence, what he was doing, said that David did not sin because human need outweighed the requirements of the ceremonial law. And so he explained that the Sabbath was created because man needed rest and spiritual renewal, not the other way around. Man was not created to be a slave to religious ceremony. So The Sabbath, here's the text where we see the Sabbath was used in the consecrated bread. Leviticus 24:8-9, it says, "Every Sabbath day he shall set in order before the Lord continually. It's an everlasting covenant for the sons of Israel. It shall be for Aaron and his sons, and they shall eat it in a holy place, for it is most holy for him. From the Lord's offering by fire, his portion forever." So what Jesus was doing here, he was challenging them to say, why don't you say David is wrong? Because it was not wrong for David as he was anointed king. Therefore, it was not wrong for Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of Man, right? So there's some important principles that we need to learn from here. Human need outweighs requirements of the ceremonial law. That's what Jesus was teaching here. Jesus presents the principle that he is Lord of the Sabbath. Okay, so he said he can heal, he can forgive sins, and that he's the Son of Man figure, and now he's saying he's the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus was to fulfill the requirements of the Sabbath, not the regulations added on by man, is what Jesus is teaching here. And the intention is to focus on the Lord of the Sabbath, not focus on the Sabbath itself. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway that we can have from this text. So we now spill into another encounter, another controversy here with the Pharisees. He entered again into the synagogue, and a man was there whose hand was withered. They were watching him to see if he would heal on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. So he's on the Pharisees' home turf here. He's in the synagogue. That's their place. And once more, the Pharisees want to accuse him of breaking the Sabbath by healing on that day. So Mark goes on and tells what happens. He said to the man with the withered hand, "Get up and come forward." And he said to them, "Is it unlawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save a life or to kill?" But they kept silent. After looking around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart. Oh, don't miss Jesus' emotion here. He was ticked off at them. He said to them, "Stretch out your hand." And he stretched out his hand, and his hand was restored. Jesus is in the business of restoring, right? And we see him doing it again here physically. The Pharisees went out and immediately began conspiring with the Herodians against him as how they might destroy him. So don't miss this. The Pharisees were very legalistic and very strict, and now they're teaming up with the Herodians. Herodians were kind of secular kings over the Jews right now, and the Pharisees would not have gotten along well at all with the Herodians. The Herodians were viewed as kind of sellouts to Rome. They would bribe for this position of king of the Jews, and so that's who the Herodians were. But what's happening? They're going to start conspiring against them. Why would that be the case? Remember, Jesus is talking about Son of Man language, one with dominion and authority. The Herodians don't want that being taken away either, because the Herodians like that position of authority and power that they have, right? And the Pharisees also like the power that they have over the people through the religious side of things. So this is huge stuff that's going on, and you can tell that Jesus is angered by this, and he's grieved. Why? Because their hearts are hard. And that's what we see that Jesus wants from us, is a tender and a contrite spirit and a contrite heart. So what we see coming down here is something that we're going to see being played out over and over in the book of Mark, is an honor-shame culture challenge. They come in and they start challenging Jesus, the Pharisees do. And you can tell that Jesus wins. We're going to talk about this more and more throughout the book of Mark. But you can tell who wins an honor-shame challenge in this culture by telling where the crowds go. And we're going to talk about that more later. But we're going to see where the crowds go after this honor-shame challenge is played out. Jesus withdrew to the sea with his disciples, and a great multitude, the crowd, A great multitude from Galilee followed, and also from Judea and from Jerusalem and from Idumea and beyond the Jordan and the vicinity of Tyre and Sidon. A great number of people had heard all that he was doing and came to him. So note that this is a broad place from which people are coming from, and it's not just from Israel, but it's outside of that. We're going to look at a map in just a moment to demonstrate that. But let's read some more of the text. And he told his disciples that a boat should stand ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crowd him. For he had healed many, with the result that all those who had afflictions pressed around him in order to touch him. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." And he earnestly warned them not to tell who he was. Why would he tell them, these unclean spirits, not to tell who they were? He didn't want the proclamation of who he is coming from these people, right? Later he's going to commend Peter for saying similar things like this, but here he tells the demons not to add to confusion. The crowds are pressing in on Jesus, and remember, his normal order is to teach and then have these healings to demonstrate the content of what he's teaching. And now so many people are pressing in on him that he can't do his primary ministry, and that is to teach. And people are coming from all over. Here's the map I talked about from the previous text. They're coming, I don't know if you can see the map very well, but they're coming from up north from Sidon and Tyre, which is Gentile territory. In fact, it's not just any Gentile territory. This is territory that would have been connected in the Old Testament to the heart of Canaanite rebellion, the heart of pagan idol worship. That's what Tyre and Sidon is connected to. And then they're coming from Galilee, right here where Jesus is doing the majority of this teaching at this time. Beyond the Jordan, again, that's back over in Gentile territory, back on the side of the Decapolis is what he's talking about there. From Judea, oh, wait a second, Judea, that's where Jerusalem is. That's where the bigwig Pharisaical religious order is based, is in Jerusalem, right? And then Idumea is way down south. And so the point of this is that Jesus is drawing people in from all over the place. So now as we progress through here, we're going to see Jesus working with his disciples, these spiritual young adults, as they are growing and maturing, and Jesus is helping them to develop and grow in his understanding of who he is. So this is where we are in chapter 3, verse 13. And he went up to the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted, and they came to him. And he appointed 12 so that they would be with him, and that they could send them out to preach and to have authority to cast out demons. And he appointed the 12, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter. So Peter is the one, remember from our intro on the book of Mark, Peter is the one who's the apostolic authority for the book of Mark. It goes on here and it lists out the rest of them. Just for the sake of time on the video, you can read the list of the rest of the disciples on your own. So he calls out, and he's going to get spiritual young adults in the game and have them be a part of the work that he is doing. So we move on now to verse 20. And he came home, and the crowd gathered again to him, to such an extent they could not even eat a meal. They couldn't even eat a meal anymore. There were so many people. When his own people heard of this, they went out to take custody of him, for they were saying, "He has lost his senses." The scribes who came down from Jerusalem, we got the bigwigs coming up from Jerusalem, are coming to check out who Jesus is and what is he doing, and why are all these people from all over this region coming to hear what Jesus is saying. They were saying, he is possessed by Beelzebub. They better watch out. And he casts out the demons by the ruler of demons, and he called them to himself, and began speaking to them in parables. How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, then the kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. If Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but he is finished. But no one can enter the strong man's house and plunder his property, unless he first binds the strong man, and then he will plunder his house. Truly I say to you, all sins shall be forgiven the Son of Men, and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemies against the Holy Spirit never has forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin, because they were saying he has an unclean spirit. They were accusing Jesus of being unclean spirit, of being the devil, Beelzebub, basically, is what this is all connected with. So what we see in this encounter here is Jesus is confronted by his people and the scribes, and then he came home, and the crowd again was pressing in on him and making it where he couldn't do what he wanted to do, and that was to teach. He's confronted by his people and the scribes, and what Jesus does is make a logical appeal. A house doesn't stand when it's divided against himself. So Jesus says, you're saying that I'm Beelzebub, that I'm on Satan's team? Well, that doesn't even make sense from a logical standpoint, because that kind of kingdom wouldn't stand. So he goes on after that logical appeal, and he warns them against the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. And so we're going to look and we're going to define through text in the Bible of what blasphemy is, so that we can understand this strange thing of blasphemy of the Holy Spirit that it talks about here. This is a confusing text for a lot of people, but when we read it in context of the whole of the Bible, and that's what we're going to do when we look at Numbers, it's going to clear itself up of what Jesus is warning them against. So Numbers 15 says, also, if one person sins unintentionally, then he shall offer 1-year-old female goat for a sin offering. The priest shall make atonement before the Lord for a person who goes astray when he sins unintentionally, making atonement for him that he may be forgiven. You shall have one law for him who does anything unintentionally, for him who is native among the sins of Israel, and for the alien who sojourns among them. So this text, the first part of it talks about this unintentional sin, so we can see that principle being played out, that there are unintentional sins. Now, note the contrast here when we pick up in verse 30 of Numbers chapter 15. But the person who does anything defiantly, whether he is native or an alien, that one is blaspheming the Lord. And that person shall be cut off from among his people, because he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment. That person shall be completely cut off. His guilt will be on him. So this idea of blaspheming is one of intentionality, and Jesus is warning them, look, you need to watch out. I'm trying to work with you here. I'm trying to teach you who I am, but you are stepping on dangerous ground by intentionally now coming against me and saying that I am on the enemy's team. So we come into another encounter here in verse 31 through 35. Then his mother and his brothers arrived. So everybody's coming against him now. And standing outside, they sent word to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they said to him, behold, your mother and your brothers are outside looking for you. So earlier it says his people, that's kind of his family, the people who were close to him were saying that he's lost his mind. And now they must have gone back to mom and brothers and said, we can't get through to him. Why don't you go see what you can do? And Jesus answering them, he said, who are my mother and my brothers? Looking about at those who were sitting around him, and he said, behold, my mother and my brothers, his disciples, the people who were listening to him, the people who are open and receptive to his message. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. So he's returning back to this scene now after that altercation with the Pharisees, and he's returning back to that scene, and he's saying his earthly family believes that is struggling with Jesus's identity too here. And so Jesus is saying, this isn't my family. Those who do the will of God, those are my family. John, in 1 John, gives us another little understanding of what's going on here. Beloved, if our heart does not condemn us, we have the confidence before God, and whatever we make, we receive for him, because we keep his commandments and do the things that are pleasing in his sight. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he commanded us. The one who keeps his commandments abides in him, and he in him. We know by this that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. So that's the idea of what Jesus is teaching here in Mark, is what John communicates in 1 John. So all these questions are being asked. Who is Jesus? What is his identity? Who are they saying he is? Is he a demon? Is he Beelzebub? Is he against Jesus? Is he some lunatic? Is he some crazy man? Why are all these accusations so serious? And why does he sternly warn them against the sin of blasphemy? Well, here's what's going on in these 7 encounters. The accusation of blasphemy connects to the reality of Jesus' identity, and what his teaching is that he was God. The accusation that he's being accused of being immoral, the reality is that his identity as the lover of sinners. Christ loved us while we were still sinners. The accusation of being unspiritual connects to the spiritual reality of what Jesus was teaching, is that he discerned God's will. The further accusations that they were lobbying against Jesus was that he was disobeying the rules. And what Jesus was saying in reality was that he obeyed God and not man. They made the accusation that he was some crazy zealot. And what Jesus was teaching about the reality of who he was is that he loved God wholeheartedly. And the final accusation that they're lobbying against him in this passage was that he was disloyal to his family. And Jesus is teaching the reality that we need to seek first the kingdom. So in closing today, I think this is a good place to land, that passage from 1 John. And it points to how we exhibit how we love God. We love one another just as he commanded, and that we are obediently following him wholeheartedly with all that who we are. So that's my challenge to you today. Go out and live like John reminds us to live here, and live a life that's pleasing to Christ. Go.